vast array of colours, delicate shapes and forms of flowers is a delight to man. So much so that he has spent much time and effort breeding them and growing them in cultivated gardens. The elaborate designs and colours have evolved for a specific purpose. The flower is the reproductive structure of the plant. Without it, there would be no means of sexual reproduction. Some plants have male and female structures on the same flower. This flower consists of sepals, which enclose the bud before the flower opened, and petals, which are usually brightly coloured in order to attract insects. Insects often play a vital role in sexual reproduction in the flowering plant. The stamen is the male reproductive structure. The stamen consists of two distinctive parts. The anther is the swollen head. It produces pollen grains which contain the male sex cell or gamete. The anther is supported by a long, thin filament. The female reproductive structure is called the carpel and consists of three distinctive parts. The stigma receives the pollen grains from other flowers. It is supported by a structure called the style. The ovary encloses one or more ovules which contain the female sex cell or gamete. It is often possible to see the structures we have just mentioned with the naked eye. The French bean plant is often studied as an example of sexual reproduction. The petals are complex and conceal the male and female reproductive structures. But if they are removed, these structures can be identified. The stamens mature before the carpels, and so in this flower appear slightly shriveled. If we examine an anther under the microscope, we can see the swollen head. Pollen grains are released from this region of the anther. These are pollen grains seen through the microscope under high magnification. Pollen must be transported from the anther of one flower to the stigma of another in order for sexual reproduction to take place. Insects often carry pollen grains from one flower to another as they feed off a sweet sugary substance called nectar produced by the flowers. The colouring of the petals and the nectar both serve to attract insects. Other flowers may rely on air currents to carry their pollen from one flower to another. In this case, there is no need for brightly coloured petals or nectar, but pollen grains must be produced in larger quantities in order that some reaches its destination. Once the pollen grains reach the stigma of another flower of the same species, they stick to its surface. Here we can see pollen grains on the surface of a stigma under the microscope. The male gamete in the pollen grains has to reach the female gamete in the ovule in order for fertilization to take place. The pollen grain produces a tube which contains the male gamete. This tube is called a pollen tube, and it grows down through the stigma and the style. It must also penetrate the tissues of the ovary before it enters the ovule, where the male and female gametes fuse in a process known as fertilization. Once the two gametes have come together in fertilisation, a new plant at this stage known as a zygote starts to grow. Under the microscope we can see the ovules within the ovary. After fertilisation, the zygote develops into an embryo within the seed. The ovule wall forms the seed coat. The ovary becomes greatly enlarged and forms a pod or fruit. Fruits have evolved to aid the dispersal of seeds. Perhaps you may wish to suggest how these various fruits disperse their seeds. Variation in plants and animals has arisen over a long period of time. Sexual reproduction is important in this evolutionary process as it involves the bringing together of genetic information from two individuals. Without sexual reproduction, the process of evolution would be much slower. Even though many flowers have evolved complex structures to prevent them from pollinating themselves, self-pollination does occur. Self-pollination does involve some reshuffling of genetic information, but does not lead to such a great diversity in the characteristics of the offspring. Over 90% of the French bean flowers pollinate themselves. Asexual reproduction, which does not involve any change in genetic information, is common in the plant kingdom. You may wish to discuss the advantages of asexual reproduction. Potato tubers and strawberry runners are both forms of asexual reproduction.